Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour Podcast. I'm Andrew Langer. So glad you can join us today. You know, if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, you can take us wherever you go. If you're traveling, as our guest is, to Lynchburg, Virginia, and in the car, you can find us on the many fine podcast platforms that are out there. Basically, anytime, anywhere you're getting your audio podcast content, you can find the Lunch Hour. If you are listening to us on one of those podcast platforms, check out what's going on in the studio on our YouTube channel. And if you're not following us on X, please do so at Lunch Hour Pod. My guest is an old friend of mine, old colleague of mine as well. He is a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. His name is Richard Morrison. And, you know, Richard, it's interesting because, you know, we're always trying to find issues that can cut across party lines in a good way. And the issue of cronyism, what the left would have called for many years corporate welfare, our free market limited government side calls cronyism. You have a new report. Well, not so new. We're a little late to the game here, 3 months out. There's a whole season that has passed, but you and I talked about you coming on to talk about this. Talk about cronyism generally, and then let's talk about the let's talk about the report itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. You know, this is something that, you know, there's a section of this in the paper, this sort of kind of historical background section. This has been a big feature in American society and politics for a long time, which is Americans have a really serious sense of fair play and expectations that the people that are public servants, the people that are policymakers and elected leaders in this country are going to do their job for public-minded reasons and not try and corruptly profit from it, but also that our business leaders out there, as you know, rapaciously in favor of profits as they may be, should at the very least not be getting those profits via taxpayers, right? You should be selling goods and services, right, not cutting some kind of corrupt deal to put it in your pocket. So, you know, Americans are a virtuous and homely lot when it comes to those sort of expectations.
Sure.
And, you know, which is why I think they often get so upset when you see some of the deals that we talk about in the paper, which is almost always one specific company coming into a place, yeah, and the local, you know, whether it's at the state level, city, county, whatever, local policymakers cutting them this special one-off deal,
sure,
so that they set up shop in a certain place, and maybe they, you know, they promise to hire a certain number of people, or they, you know, operate a certain facility for a certain period of time. But the idea that those deals are often private, they're often not disclosed to the public, and that they are, in a way, a special favor between one person, right, or a tiny group of people who are writing the checks, often from the taxpayer's dime, to a handful of for-profit companies. So that happens all the time, and some of these deals are worse than others, right? Some of them are kind of more egregious. Some of them have a little more kind of cover, and, you know, maybe there's some, you know, the public is kind of getting something out of it. But in general, that dynamic where financial benefits, specifically taxpayer benefits, are handed out to specific companies. That's
right.
Things that are not generally available to everyone, to all comers. That is a problem. That's a long-standing problem, and that is something that generally Americans and U.S. voters tend to get pretty upset about when they find out about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, you know, the work that you guys do at CEI, the work that I've done over the years, it stems from this basic precept that the more power government has to do something, you know, whether it's create regulations that pick winners and losers in the marketplace, or hand out massive amounts, not even massive amounts, not so massive amounts of taxpayer money to private entities, the more power government has to do those things, the more opportunities there are for corruption. And I know we can talk about cronyism and corruption in a second, but at the very least, right, if we are concerned about corruption and corrupt practices in government, the only answer is to limit the ability of government to do these things. I believe you would agree with this. Talk about that, and talk about what the public doesn't seem to quite understand, that every incidence of corruption is because someone is trying to get either a regulatory deal or some kind of change or some kind of gimme out of this. Or am I missing something?
No, I think that's true. And, you can, there's plenty of people that, we know who have written about this dynamic over the years. Our old friend, Tim Carney, who's affiliated with the American Enterprise Institute and the Washington Examiner. He wrote a book many years ago called The Big Ripoff, which is about taxpayers being ripped off, and part of the, connected to the dynamic you're talking about. And he had a great phrase that he likes to use. He said, the only way to get rid of corruption in high places is to get rid of the high places, right?
Right.
So like you said, the more power the government has to hand out money, the more kind of temptation to sin, if you will, there is going to be in that process. Right. And we have, my co-author John Mazzina and I point out in the paper, a lot of these examples were contributed by John, examples of people who have been running economic development funds in various states and places that have been arrested for, convicted of, and there's a few of them are even in prison now for corruptly handing out these taxpayer money. So we know it happens, right? This is not a completely hypothetical situation we're worried about. And then the sort of good government types, it's something our late friend Fred Smith called the goo-goos, who say, oh, well, we don't need less government. We just need better government. We need sort of, quote, good government reforms. Right. Fred was very skeptical about that, and I share Fred's skepticism. We just need to administer them better, or have more hearings, or have more audits, or have more reviews. And some of that stuff would be great. It's better than nothing. But better yet, not to have a tiny handful of people handing out millions of dollars of taxpayer money in the first place.
It gets down to, what I used to say that was the great failure of the 1960s, which is, right, if there was massive protests about a government that was intruding into the personal lives of, thousands, if not millions of Americans, abusing its power. And the answer, of course was, well, then shrink the size and scope, shrink their ability to engage in these things, right? We talk about this with regards to the Church Committee and abuses of the intelligence community in the 1960s and into the early 1970s. But, there were folks who were, as Fred would call them, the goo-goos, who said, no, we just need to take this, abusive government and replace it with benign, loving government of our own. And it doesn't work, right? The tendency, if the power is there, somebody is going to try to use it, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of comes down to people saying, "Oh, well, we don't need less corruption. We just need better corruption." Well,
yes,
I don't think that's the solution. But also because one of the reasons why we have a First Amendment, why we have a Bill of Rights, why we have the Bill of Rights is usually described as a sort of a negative set of rights, meaning that it's a list of things, not that the government's going to do for you, but it's a list of things the government is forbidden from doing to you. And those are some of the most important rights at all, right? Congress shall make no law respecting these number of things, not Congress shall give me these benefits. So that one of the reasons why that's so important is that virtue is in the eye of the beholder, and in a certain sense, corruption is in the eye of the beholder. Like some of these, these economic deals we're talking about, I would call them bad deals, and maybe even some of them verge on corruption in a legally actionable sense. But someone else would say, "Oh, well, no, I think maybe company X will will hire a bunch of people and they'll create some jobs, and it's fine that we're giving them $100 million." Well, we can fight over that, or we can just say, well, maybe we should have economic development policies that don't overtax and regulate businesses and leave it at that. That way we're not stuck in an endless debate of saying your deal, you think the deal is virtuous, I think it's corrupt, and then we have to like go to the courts to figure all this out. If we had a system that benefited what we want to benefit, which is we want a good environment for job creators, good environment for wealth creation, but we don't want to have to like fight over the virtues and vices of every particular instance of that, then we should have that sort of negative view, which is the government's not going to hurt you, and then leave everything else to us as individuals to decide.
Right. So let's talk about the report and the examples that are in there, because it is fascinating. And this is why I wanted to talk to you about this. What I have always appreciated about the work that you do and the work that CEI does is that you guys are great storytellers. So let's talk about what's in it and some of these examples and illustrative of the point that if we simply curtailed the power, these things wouldn't happen. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So, one of the biggest ones that I think a lot of people have heard about from the past few years ago is the Amazon HQ2 process. So Amazon, one of the biggest companies in the world, put out this public sort of a request for proposal, as it were, saying we're going to build a big, major kind of secondary headquarters in the United States, and we are looking to see what cities and states all around the country would like to give us, right, and to welcome us and build and locate in their area. So this was considered kind of a golden opportunity for lots of places, both big places that are big and already fairly successful, like New York City, but also lots of smaller places that had trouble creating jobs and creating economic opportunity. And they're like, well, this is it. This is our golden ticket, right? If we can land this big Amazon second headquarters thing. So city and state employees all around the country flew into a frenzy writing up these very detailed proposals, and city councils and the local economic development policymakers went into a frenzy of sort of offering up everything in the kitchen sink, including sometimes almost their the firstborn of each household, among their constituents, to say, we will roll out the red carpet. We will give you basically absolutely anything you could possibly want, Amazon managers. We will give you free land. We will give you free infrastructure upgrades. We will make it so you don't have to pay any property taxes for the next 10 years, and so on and so on and so on. So they were basically trying to bribe Amazon into locating in their city. Now, only the premise was only one of these was going to be a winner. So you have to not just have a good proposal, you've got to have the best proposal in the entire country in an environment when you knew that plenty of other places were already trying to offer them everything they could. So when these proposals started to get reported on in all the sort of local places where they were happening, a lot of taxpayers looked at each other and said, like, I don't know, I feel like we're giving away the store here. Is it really worth it to spend these like millions and millions and millions of dollars several years into the future, that one, either it's money that's coming out of the public treasury or it's money that's not coming in, it's going to have to be replaced someplace else.
And to be really clear, right? I mean, in an era in which so many smaller communities are talking about how online ordering has fundamentally changed the economy and dealt blows to brick and mortar. And you and I, obviously, I think you and I both believe that those are good things. We want a free economy here. On the other hand, if you're complaining about it on the one hand, and then you're talking about giving away the store to bring their second headquarters to your community, there's a fundamental disconnect, isn't there?
Well, yeah. I mean, we want an environment where innovative new companies can grow and provide services to consumers and create jobs. But the sort of fundamental question of fairness is: are we treating equal companies equally, right? And not giving favoritism to one industry or the other. This is another problem, another kind of like subset of this issue that we talk about in the paper, which is a lot of times the local policymakers will try to be sort of like junior venture capitalists, where they will decide, this is the hot new industry, we got to get on this trend, we got to jump on this, and they want to be kind of market makers out there.
Right. We want
And
to bring a monorail to our town because Ogdenville has it.
yeah, and did great things for Shelbyville. So we
Yes.
want whatever the cool new thing is, right?
Right.
And is works sometimes in both directions. Sometimes everyone says, "Oh, we want a new AI data center because it's the hot cool new industry
100%.
trend." And then every once in a while, you'll have cranky people who say, "Oh no, AI data centers are the worst. We think they're gross and terrible, and so we're going to try and go out of our way to block them," rather than just say, if someone wants to build a facility here that meets our zoning codes, then and hire some people, then they should be able to do that, right? And they should pay the
Right.
same tax rate as everybody else.
Yeah, I mean it's a general precept of sort of the level playing field in terms of how laws and regulations are meted out here. I mean, do you guys look at the cost? Because it seems to me, as you point out, right, they're giving away the store. It's the same thing with a lot of these stadium deals. It's funny because there was the whole discussion about putting the new DC sports team arena, and then this gets very parochial. I know our listeners are all over the country, but in the area that's south of DC, in sort of the Arlington and Alexandria border, what's known as Potomac Yards. They were going to put an arena in there, and there were all kinds of gimmies that were being offered. And all I could think about was traffic is already swamped. We talk about infrastructure. It would cost huge sums of money to upgrade this. It's never going to create the economic benefit, let's assume for a moment, and I think you and I are both in agreement that this is a false way to create economic benefit. But even if we concede at that point, the economic benefit is never going to equal what is being given away, or does it, Richard? Is there a balance, or do we literally give away the store?
Well, I think there's a lot of economic study of this. A lot of economic studies have been done about this to measure this impact, and the answer is there are virtually no examples where the stadium subsidy deals have actually paid for themselves. Right in on my show for the economy, we did an episode 137 recently with David McGarry of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, and he talked specifically about the subsidy deal that's now still in process with the Washington Commanders, and all of the claims that are being made by boosters who want it to go forward. And it's very easy to hire an economic consultant who will write you a study that says, oh well, this will be $100 million bonus, right, for the area,
Right.
but a lot of those are not. They're just not honestly done when they're done by independent academics who don't have any skin in the game. They don't they're not worried about it either way or the other, and they can look at it objectively. It's more a matter of moving money from one category to another and just kind of pretending that there isn't a deficit on the other side.
I mean, listen. I know, Richard, that I'm a frequent visitor to the Ralph John area of Maryland, where the Commanders Stadium currently is, because of all of the great economic development that has happened there. And I say partially tongue in cheek because I used to go to the Wegmans that is relatively nearby, but it has virtually nothing to do with the location of the stadium there, which is in and of itself an economic dead zone for the most part. It is. But so we've got the Amazon situation. Where did they wind up going? I don't even remember at this point. It's all so far in the past. What did they wind? Are they going to Crystal City? Is that what they decided ultimately?
So yeah, at first they thought they were going to split the process into a couple smaller facilities. So the sort of the premise ended up changing even as the process went forward, and so they decided to sort of scale down and have a smaller Tennessee-based facility, and then they were going to go into New York City, and then there was so much backlash, like political backlash in New York City. And this was another example of how there were sort of strange bedfellows from different parts of the political spectrum.
Sure.
Both, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, darling of the left side of the political spectrum, and even Tucker Carlson was talking about this at the time on the sort of the right side, saying this is a giveaway from taxpayers. This is not a fair deal. So there was such a backlash to the New York part of the deal, they canceled it, and so they didn't go into New York City. But they did end up locating a lot of people now in right across the river from DC in Arlington County, in an area that was has now recently been dubbed National Landing. And just for people who
wait, is it called National Landing because that's where they land the planes at Reagan National Airport?
It's no, I think it was a reference to historically boats coming up
okay.
from the Potomac.
Because anyway, National. I'm just gonna keep saying it's because of the airport and landing planes at the airport. But go ahead.
But but for anyone who's from around DC, I think a lot of people heard about this and they said, oh, well, the proposal is for Amazon to come into this area and we're calling it National Landing, which is sort of Arlington County in the north of Alexandria. And a lot of people rolled their eyes and said, oh, well, these Amazon people are coming in and they're like renaming our whole neighborhoods because this is not a name that was historically applied here. But it was actually the local economic development people created that name and pitched it to Amazon and said, basically, oh, we'll create a whole new neighborhood for you, right? They just basically renamed it.
Yeah. No, it's Crystal City, Pentagon City, Potomac Yards, all of those have his sort of historical meaning. So let's sort of shift our attention over to DEI and ESG, because again, along the lines of cronyism, one of the things I spend a lot of time talking about, Wayne Cruz over at CEI talks about, is, the more complicated or the more artificial metrics you create. Wayne spends a lot of it talking about, the measurements of so-called economic benefits of regulation, right? The more you can manipulate, how we measure things, the more the process itself can be manipulated and the outcomes can be manipulated. It really is almost Stalinist 5-year plan, like, where we invent the number here, and when we miss the number there, it doesn't matter because we'll reinvent it again anyway. So talk about ESG, DEI, what was happening in the previous 4 years and where things stand now, and how this plays into the issue of cronyism.
Yeah, so going back, it's probably several years now, there was a huge sort of vogue in the corporate world for, again, what people call ESG, environmental, social, and governance, environmental, social, governance investing, ESG frameworks, ESG management. And there was an idea that, which is really a very old idea, that, corporations should be responsible and ethical, and that we need some sort of construct, some way of measuring that, some way of enforcing that. 20 years ago, we called it CSR, corporate social responsibility. And
right.
Again, our friend Fred Smith was writing a lot about that back then. Later, there was a report that was published by the United Nations and the Swiss Finance Department and a bunch of big bank partners, and they coined the term ESG, and then that became popular later. And they're similar concepts. And but the problem is not, should corporations do good things? Sure, I think it seems like a pretty uncontroversial premise. Corporations should do good things and do fewer bad things. But like with all things, like as our hero, the great economist Thomas Sowell likes to say, well, who decides? Right.
Right.
Who gets to decide what the good things are that we want more of and the bad things are that we want less of?
And in a truly democratic system, it's the market that decides.
Right. It's the market, or, country by country,
Sure.
Legislatures, Congress passes a law that says corporations can do this, they can't do that. But there's some democratic legitimacy to that. With a lot of the ESG stuff, it's unelected people, it's UN bureaucrats, it's some academics who show up to conferences. They are, confabs and committees and quasi-governmental organizations, as they call it, quangos, as they call them in the UK.
Quangos.
NGOs.
Yes.
Got together and sort of wrote these, lists of do's and don'ts. And the vast majority of the people who were in those groups, in those rooms, and on those committees and teams were progressive left type people. And so they came up with a list of recommendations for corporations that were consistent with a very progressive left ideology. And if you are a progressive left person, I'm sure you think they're great. So that has to do with that includes things like going net zero on carbon emissions for the climate, regardless of how much it costs, racial and ethnic hiring quotas, DEI, and a lot of other pretty controversial stuff, right? So if you're in favor of it, then it's probably a great list of things to you want companies to do. But not everyone is, and therefore saying that every company in the world, every major company, every major asset manager, every major bank and investment firm needs to follow this ESG list of do's and don'ts. Well, you're kind of crowding out half of the population of the United States, right? If you have an ESG list of do's and don'ts, that's all kind of progressive left side. So that sort of kind of crept in, and a lot of people weren't paying attention to it. And then over the past, sort of 5 years, say, a lot of people on the sort of the center, the right, conservatives, said, "Wait a minute! It seems like corporate America is kind of being taken over by all these left-wing policy priorities. We're not really a fan of that. We shouldn't be going whole hog down this progressive left rabbit hole when it comes to big companies adopting public policies and endorsing policies that often had nothing to do with their bottom line or their company. I don't know if every sneaker and athleisure wear company needs to have a public policy on trans identity or climate change or affirmative action, right? These weren't things that were central to the company's mission or products, and they were politically divisive and alienated a big chunk of their potential customer base. So we're now coming back around where there's a big kind of ESG skeptic movement, and a lot of companies, a lot of very high profile companies have been dropping their sort of ESG commitments, saying, we're not going to sign on to this kind of left-wing statement of principles for corporate America anymore. We're just kind of try and go back to neutral. Again, everything from big banks and big asset managers, from JP Morgan Chase and BlackRock have backed away from some of their climate stuff. And then I know a lot of people probably heard of Robbie Starbuck, the activist who's out there engaging with / harassing and criticizing and trying to cajole some companies to pull back, again, from mostly a lot from DEI stuff. It's like Harley Davidson or Tractor Supply Company, other companies like that.
Because I know when I'm going and shopping for a motorcycle or tractor, I'm very interested in their ESG policies. But it gets to the core things that you talk about in the report, right? There are two sort of fundamental problems. Number one is you have the corrupt relationship between the folks who are pushing for these DEI, ESG policies, who want to get transfusions of cash out of the corporation to help support or monitor or whatever, right? So it's essentially some kind of, I'm going to say it, a payoff. But then the other part of this is the reinvention of the metrics of success, right? And moving away from objective measurements, right? We can look at a corporation's balance sheet and see the objective measurement. What is the return on the investment for their investors? But if you are creating all kinds of other subjective metrics for success, well, then the bottom line gets all kinds of fuzzy. And this gets into the overall theme of the report, right? Which is the public isn't well served, whether it's the customer public or investors, or in the case of governance, the voting public. Talk about that, Richard.
Yeah, so that's been one of the biggest problems, I think, that we've now become more aware of in the past few years. So, in order to have any sort of compliance with an ESG agenda, right, you need a set of rules. Like I said, the do's and don'ts. You need at least proposed lists of activities and policies that companies are supposed to adopt. But then you need to sort of measure them and assess them. So there are a bunch of firms out there, a firm called Sustainalytics, for example, that is a sort of financial analytics firm specializing in this sort of ESG, virtuous, allegedly virtuous corporation stuff, and they publish ratings of it's like every public company and very detailed numbers. And so if you looked at those ratings, it looks like a big spreadsheet full of numbers, and you say, oh, well, that must be objective data, right? Because there's all these numbers there, right? All these rankings about who's good and who's not good on very topics. But though that's kind of an illusion, right? It's sort of an illusion of rigor that's not based on a whole lot. A lot of these rankings don't agree across ratings agencies. So,
right.
If in traditional finance, if you are rating something that's numerically based, like a bond rating, right? Is this an A bond, B bond, double A minus, whatever it is? There's different agencies that rate those independently, but their ratings are often very similar, right? You're not going to have a AAA rated bond from Moody's and a C rated bond, the same bond rated C by another agency. You've got a high degree of correlation, we would say, right?
Yeah.
The best ones are rated best by all the informed people. When it comes to ESG ratings, they're all over the map, right? And even in some cases from year to year from the same rating source, they don't really agree.
Right.
So there was a big study done a few years ago by 3 scholars associated with the Sloan School of Business at MIT, where they did these comparisons, and they looked like, well, is there consistency across these ratings, which there would be, right, if they were based on real stuff. And they said, oh, there is not. There is a very low level of consistency here. And so that was a big paper that kind of blew a big hole in the ESG world, and they created a whole study center about it. They call it the aggregate confusion problem, and so MIT Sloan people have been having conferences and events about that for the past 4 years, about how ESG ratings are not very rigorous, because it comes down to, in some cases, the question is like, well, does they have to sort of sit down, the people who are actually doing this, and say, oh, well, we want, our list of things says that every company needs to have an inclusive workforce policy. And so we're going to rate, so we're going to rate everyone in the S&P 500. As we rate all these 500 companies, we have to decide whether company X, Y, and Z have an inclusive enough workforce policy. Well, what does that mean, right? There's no numerical definition for what counts as inclusive, so you just have to sort of make it up, all right? And if you're someone who prioritizes, again, a kind of like progressive left version of that, then you're going to assign values on whatever the most popular progressive left policies are. But that's not going to be consistent across industries, and it's not going to be something that everyone agrees with.
And the more to the point, the more mutable these measurements are, the more that they can be played to whatever, to produce whatever desired outcome you want. This is the conversation that Wayne Cruz and I have had about essentially the inculcation of these values into the cost benefit analyses guidelines that came out of the OMB during the Biden administration. Right, once you essentially get away from objective cost measurements and you create these artificial benefits measurements, you can make the numbers do whatever you want. And Wayne's right. I mean, it underscores this idea that the pro regulator environment, they don't care about costs. All they care about is regulation. They don't even really care about benefits, because if they did that, they would, be a lot more objective about that. I mean, that's the danger. And again, this is where you can get into all kinds of cronyist aspects, right? Someone shows up and says to Corporation X, by our measurement, you are not engaging in X, Y, and Z ESG, DEI policies. But tell you what, you hire us, you pay us $1 million, and guess what? Magically, you're gonna comport with our guidelines. And again, nobody gets served. It just becomes this giant, like all cronyism is. It sucks money out of the useful economy and puts it in, diverts it into areas that are not productive, right? I mean, is that an accurate reflection of the situation?
Yeah, I think so. To a certain level, this becomes, kind of a racket, right? There are agencies that will advise you on like how to vote your shares, right? So if you're an asset manager, even if you're an individual, but if you own, shares in a company, and then corporate annual meeting season comes around, and there's all these things that shareholders get to vote on. Should we adopt a resolution on climate change? Should we, adopt DEI standards? Should we do this or that? These rating agencies will say, here's our recommendations. You should vote yes on this, no on that, no on this other thing, when the ballots come up at these big major corporate meetings. But those same companies then turn around and offer consulting services to the companies right, for money about how to manage this process. So they're playing both sides of that game. And and your point about the using these sort of subjective, not very rigorous data and ratings, you can justify anything. It kind of reminds me how, years ago there was a major rulemaking at the EPA that had to do with air quality, and I think this was under the Obama administration, and our old friend Steve Malloy has written about this, how they put out a report, and they said, here are the costs and benefits of this rule, and it was going to be extremely costly for
Yes.
power plants to comply with. And they said, well, here here's the costs, and here's the benefits, and it didn't look like it was too expensive. Like the costs were much bigger than the benefits. But they said, oh, but that doesn't tell the whole story. There's also these co-benefits. Right. There's these sort of secondary downstream co-benefits that are, 100 times as big. Right.
100%.
So,
yes.
And so the traditional, again, some economists have been pretty good and rigorous over the years, over the decades, about doing a cost-benefit analysis. Like it's not perfect. It depends what assumptions go into it. But doing it the sort of like halfway reasonable way kind of wasn't enough. So they invented this like entire new category of benefits to put on the other side to tilt it. And what's funny, you can imagine if you're in a class in a science or a class, you're doing a little logical diagram, there might be a 4-part grid, right? You would have costs and you would have benefits. And then if you have co-benefits, certainly there's also co-costs, right? Because if there's this
100%.
big, but that was the lost quarter, right? There were no co-costs, right? So there's this giant supposed secondary benefits, but there's no secondary costs, and that was just they were completely loading the dice. I
wish I'd had this conversation with you when I was doing my comments, because it would have been fun to have included that kind of a diagram in there with sort of the disappearing, lower left-hand corner, because that's exactly what they were doing. I mean, I love the idea that they were presenting the benefits globally of particular regulations, and then having American taxpayers foot the bill. And you're absolutely right. We would have pointed out there is a cost globally as well when these things happen. Listen, let's sort of turn our attention to a couple of other fun things. You are, of course, the host of the Free the Economy podcast. Mm-hmm. I've been a guest on there and loved sitting down and chatting with you. You just had Ed Hudgens on to talk about human achievement, which is so cool. Some other highlights, recent episodes of Free the Economy podcast.
Yeah, I think we're homing in our 150th episode, so we're excited about that. If you look at all the podcasts that are launched everywhere on every platform, everywhere in the world, a lot of them, don't last so long. So I recently read that you only have to publish, I believe, 21 episodes to be in the top 1%. So we're excited about that.
There you
one
go.
Of the things that we really try and lean. One of the things we try and lean into is now abundance policy these days, right? So that's the idea that we need to kind of unleash the American economy to create more housing, more healthcare, more transportation, childcare, education options, and that we can often do that by again mention our old friend Fred Smith. Not by teaching the grass to grow, but by moving the rocks off the lawn.
100%.
Like to say. So energy abundance is a big part of that, because we know our old friend Julian Simon said energy is the master resource to unlocking everything else in society. So our current episode 145, is about energy abundance. That's with Stephen Perkins of the American Conservation Coalition.
Fun.
So we're excited about that.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm just sorry, as I have my glasses on, folks are looking. I wanted to double check while we're talking. I believe I'm at episode 156 of this podcast. So this is as we're recording this. So I'm staying a little bit ahead of you, because you gotta stay ahead of that competition. Not that we're in competition, but of course we're always in competition. Hey, Richard, I've asked you this before, but let's come back and talk about this, because I think so we talk about podcasts. Before I came on to do this, I had been contemplating doing a podcast called Outside Interests, talking to folks in policy about their like Kent Lastman, the president of CEI, does distance swimming, swam the channel, which is astounding. Or Larry Spywak at the Phoenix Center, he plays blues harmonica. When you're not doing this stuff, what are you doing? What are some of your outside interests?
That's a great question. One of the things I'm into these days, and of course, there's always a connection to any the public policy world, but really into sort of health, fitness, nutrition, and what people call sort of, functional or integrative health, helping people live better, live longer. And, there's a lot of great,
Really?
yeah. And there's a lot of great podcasts out there on this topic as well. A lot of people maybe they've heard about a guy named Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's out at Stanford, does a lot of research about human health and longevity. And so there's the question of these new kind of discoveries and technologies and strategies for living healthier. It's, losing weight, lowering your risk of heart attack, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you and I both lost weight in recent years. So
yeah, 60 pounds and counting
wow.
now. And
hey, I'm just again, just behind you at 55. So there you go.
So the question is, to the kind of political world, are we going to have access to all of these sort of treatments and strategies going forward? Are we going to have, say, a Food and Drug Administration that allows new discoveries to reach the people? Are they going to be so kind of gate-kept or over-regulated that, we're not going to be able to get the opportunities that come out of them? So one is, learning about the science and the behavior of it. And then two, when the rubber hits the road, are we going to actually be able to take advantage of it?
It's interesting because I literally in my comments to the FDA on these kinds of things as they're talking about ultra processed foods, I spent a lot of time talking about comparative risk assessment, and from the general what is comparative risk assessment to what is comparative risk assessment when we're talking about nutrition policy to what is comparative risk assessment specifically when we're talking about trade-offs in foods that might be considered by some to be ultra processed but nevertheless have benefits in terms of being low carb, low sugar, et cetera. So helping to contribute to folks, being able to stay on a healthier diet. We've got to be more thoughtful about these things. Richard, how do folks find out more about the great work that you're up to? How do they find the Free the Economy podcast?
Yeah, you can find the podcast at freetheeconomy.org. It's also searchable on all the usual podcast platforms. You can find me on X at Richard Morrison, my first and last name. And then, of course, all my published work is at the Competitive Enterprise Institute website at cei.org.
Well, I had a wonderful, wonderful time at the CEI dinner just a couple of weeks ago. So thank you all for that. You know me, I have a huge spot in my heart for anything CEI oriented. Richard Morrison, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andy.
This has been yet another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, check us out on all of the fine audio podcast platforms that are out there. If you're listening to us, check us out on YouTube, leave a like, hit the subscription button, leave a comment, and most importantly, let your friends and family members and family members' friends and friends' family members all know how much you are enjoying the show. Follow us on X at Lunch Hour Pod. I'm Andrew Langer. I'm your host. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.